All right, class. So today what we're going to be focusing on in this lesson is how to find axes of symmetry and vertex for a quadratic equation. Now, before we go into our examples, a couple things we need to go over is that a standard form quadratic equation is written in the format of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. The letter A, B, and C are numbers, okay, that we will have in the problems, and it's important that we know that the value of A cannot be 0. All right. Now there are two types of parabolas, and a quadratic equation produces what we call a U shape. Okay, so the quadratic equation is a U shape, and it's also called a parabola. But now the two types that we have is a positive one and a negative one. If we have a positive A value, the parabola opens up. So it's more like a U, okay? The big part of it, the opening part, will be facing up. Now, if the A value is negative, the parabola opens down, meaning the wider part or the opening of it will be facing downward, okay? Now, with that, we're going to look at axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry is a vertical line that divides the parabola into two equal halves. Now, there is a formula that we use that is attached to the axis of symmetry, and that formula is x equals negative b divided by 2a. Now, we have to make sure we pay attention that the negative is already there. So if we get problems that has a number that is negative 2, that means we're going to have two negatives in play versus just one. But the preset of the problem or the original equation has a negative in it. So we don't want to take that away. So we got to make sure when we start setting these up, we pay attention to if the number that we got to plug in for B is negative already. If it is, that means we should be showing two negatives, two minus signs or two negatives, either one, whatever you want to call it. And then we solve from there. And then the last part is the vertex, okay? Now the vertex is the turning point of the parabola. It says that the axis symmetry goes through that vertex point. Now, if you notice that I said the word point, so because I said the word point, that means every time that we go to solve these, we're going to have an order pair, and the order pairs, you know, are x and y. So when I say the turning points will give us an x value and a y value. Now, in that, the x value comes from the axis of symmetry. And what we do is once we find that axis of symmetry, we can use that to solve for the y value, and that's how we get our vertex, okay? Now, when the vertex is at its lowest point, it is called the minimum. And when it's at its highest point, it is called the maximum, okay? So those are some of the background information that we need to know. Now let's go look at our example. For our first set of examples, what we're going to be looking at is we need to draw and label the axis of symmetry, the vertex, the minimum, and the maximum, depending on what parabola we have. So when we look at our first parabola, which is this one, okay, if we look at that, what we got to do is label our axis of symmetry first. Now, the definition stated that the axis of symmetry is a vertical line. Vertical lines go from top to bottom, okay, that divides the parabola into two parts, two equal parts, all right? So if we look at the parabola that we have, where can I divide it equally? So if I start at the bottom and I just kind of draw like dash lines, that'll actually cut that parabola into two halves. Now, right now we're sketching, so that means it might not be perfectly halves, but it's cutting it into two halves. So we're going to label that line that we have here as your axis of symmetry. Instead of writing the whole thing, I'm just going to abbreviate, okay? Now, vertex. It says that the vertex is at the turning point of your parabola. So the turning point is where it starts, and then you'll notice that it can either be going up or down, but in this one, because we're looking at it, and our starting point is here, and it's going down, so as soon as it turns, that produces your vertex. So the turning point happens here, okay? So that point there will be my vertex. Now, do we have a maximum or a minimum? The maximum or minimum is based off that lowest point or that vertex point. Now, if you look at that, is it high or is it low? From what we have, it is low. It's at the bottom, okay? So what we have for this one will be a minimum. All right, now looking at the other one, same thing, go ahead and cut it into 2 equal halves. So if we cut it into 2 equal halves, that will give us our axis of symmetry. Okay, and then based off where we see that the actual parabola is turned, it turns about right here. So that will give us our vertex. And now just looking at the vertex point, it is at the top. Because it's at the top, that will give us a maximum. All right, so just labeling the parts and what we have, depending on where the turning point is, whether it's high or low, that will give us our max or minimum. The axis of symmetry will divide that line perfectly in half. And the vertex is basically that dot that is at the lowest or the highest point. All right, so now moving on to the next example. In this example, it wants us to find the axis of symmetry in the vertex of the following parabola. Now, in order to do that, what we got to first do is we need to label our A, B, and C. So we're going to label what we have for A and what we got for B and what we got for C. So our A is 1, our B is 16, our C is 64. All right. Now we're going to bring back that formula that we need for axis of symmetry because we need to complete that first. So the axis of symmetry formula is going to be x is equal to negative b divided by 2a. So the negative sign is already there. I don't want to take that away, so I'm going to put that in a different color. The b that it gave me was 16, so I'm going to put 16 beside that, put my fraction bar, put the 2. That's already there. Now the a was 1, so I'm going to put that in parentheses. Okay? Now, if I start doing my multiplying and stuff, negative 16 stays the same because there's nothing multiplied to it. 2 times 1 is 2. All right, negative 16 divided by 2, that will actually gives me negative 8. All right, so we got the x value. The axis of symmetry is the x value that we need, okay? Because it gave us the x value, now for us to find the y value to finish out our vertex, what we do is we take what they gave us for the x, okay? And we're going to plug into the equation. All right, so if we start filling in the equation that we got, it started out with an x squared. Now x is negative 8. So I'm going to put negative 8, parentheses with a little 2, put my plus sign, 16, and right beside the 16 was an x, but x is negative 8. So I'm going to put parentheses, negative 8 plus 64. All right, now once we get there and we solve all of that, we will have the y value that we need to make our vertex. So we're going to use Desmos for this part. In this part, when we go to Desmos, we're going to type that full equation that we just wrote, all this into Desmos exactly like it is. And it'll give us our result. So parentheses, negative 8, close that, we're going to raise it to the second power. It's going to be plus 16, parentheses, negative 8. Close that, and we got plus 64. All right, so once we typed everything in, it gave me my result as being 0, so the y value is 0. All right, with my y value being 0, now remember I told you that the vertex is a point. So for vertex, we got to make an order pair. That order pair is going to be that negative 8 that we got for axis of symmetry and that y value that we got when we saw it after we plugged it in, okay? So that's that example there. All right, so in our next example, what we're going to be finding is the axis of symmetry and the vertex again, okay? Now, in order to do that, we had a process that we went through. The first thing we did was we labeled what our A was, which in this one is negative 1. Our B in this one is negative 12. Our C is negative 36. Now knowing what our A, B, and C is, we can go ahead and find our axis of symmetry. And that's a formula that we got to follow, which is x equals negative b over 2a. Now, with the negative already being there, we're going to go ahead and put that in a different color so we know that's already there. And then we're going to put our b there, which is also a negative 12. So we're going to put a negative 12 right beside that over 2 times our a, which is negative 1. Now, if we look at this negative 12, a negative and a negative make a positive. So that changes that 12 to be a plus 12 at the top over 2 times negative 1, which makes negative 2. And 12 divided by negative 2 makes negative 6. So our axis of symmetry is starting out to be negative 6. Now remember that we take that negative 6 that we got, and we have to take it and we're going to plug into the equation. So if we plug into the equation, replacing the x with negative 6. So negative is already there, then we're going to throw in that other negative 6 squared minus 12 parentheses negative 6 minus 36, okay? This is when we take that and we plug it into Desmos. So if we plug that into Desmos, we got a negative, a parentheses negative 6, close that parentheses and raise it to the second power, minus 12, parentheses negative 6, close that and put negative 36. And for that y, we actually got 0. Now that we have that solved, we can write our vertex. Remember, the vertex is a point. So for our vertex, it's an order pair. The x value was negative 6, because that came from our axis of symmetry. The y value came from our equation, which is 0. So the vertex for that one is negative 6 and 0. Axis of symmetry is negative 6. All right. Okay, so for our last example, it says that we need to find the axis of symmetry and vertex for the following parabola. Okay. Now, in order to do that, we need to list out what our a is, which in this case is negative 2. Our b is 24. Our c is negative 70. Once we list out our a, b, and c, we can find our axis of symmetry, which is x equals negative b over 2a. So our b is positive 24. Now we already got the negative there, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in a different color. That's going to bring down my 24. I put my 2 times my a value, which is negative 2. So that top part don't change, so it stays negative 24. But 2 times negative 2 gives me negative 4. And if I take negative 24 and divide it by negative 4, I get a positive 6. Okay, now with this being positive 6, we want to enter that into the equation. And what we're replacing is the x. So if I go to put that into my equation, the first thing I'll write is my y equals, and we got a negative 2, and the x is right behind that, but we say x is 6 now, so we put in parentheses 6, raised to the second power, bring our plus down, put our 24, right behind that was an x, so x is 6 now, so we put that in parentheses, and we got negative 70. All right, now in Desmos, when we go to enter that, we'll type it in just like we have it without the y equals, okay? So we're going to do negative 2, parentheses 6, close it, raise it to the second power, plus 24, parentheses 6, close that, minus 70, and we get 2. So that gives me my y is equal to 2. So now I can write my vertex, and vertex is a point. The first part of my order pair comes from my axis of symmetry, which was 6. And the answer that I got once I plugged the 6 into the equation is the y value, which is 2. So the order pair for the vertex is 6, 2, okay? And the axis of symmetry is actually 6. So now that we covered all our examples for the lesson about axis of symmetry and vertex, you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.